Here's your main power switch and your light switch, which I'll point out the light later on. This must be in the on position for the switch on top of the light mechanism to work. If this one's off, that one won't work either. Your inputs are here. They're labeled water, water return, steam, and pure steam. And here's your drain. These were all connected. I've run this, and they do not have steam capability, so I pressurized it there to make sure that it was okay. Did run the water, but I ran into a chiller. A chiller is not enough to do the proper job. You need to have this set up to actual a flow of water, like from a sink or something, unless you've got a really large chiller. Okay, your electrical input is here. You'll have the cord. This is what came with it, which you will get. It's 208 volts, one single phase. These are all extra inputs for auxiliary equipment, which this unit does not have. And here is your air input is here with a quick disconnect, and your oxygen input is here. This unit does have dissolved oxygen capability, but it has no sensor. This is a drain line, and this is a steam line. This is an exhaust port. I have it currently hooked up with the air coming in so that the valves could operate and make things, turn on and off while I was testing it. And I wanted to show you that the gauge is reading in the front. On this side, I just want to show you a couple key things. You have a main steam valve here. You'll see these canisters. There's a couple of these canisters. These are filters. The drawings that come with the manual show you what they do for that particular line. I did have these open. I checked them to make sure they look fairly clean. So they were left as is. This is the mass flow controller for the dissolved oxygen, if you wanted to use that. Your sparge valve is here. This is your agitator motor. And this is your light. And this is the view glass to see it in the tank. So remember, I had the light switch on. This is a momentary switch, so it only holds on as long as I hold it. And as you can see, I've got water in the tank. And I also have the spurge on, so you can see the sparge gas, which in this case is just air, coming up. And if you look close enough, you should be able to see the agitator turning inside. This is your main drain valve. It's a manual valve. These are quick connects for the connections in the back. And this is your drain valve, open and close here. If you open it right now, it'll drain out the drain in the back. Your other option is to take this off, and you can have it drain into the trough here into the front. The trough also has a hose that goes to a drain. You'll probably want to put that to a floor drain. Just as a point of reference, these are your Pirani valves, pumps 1, 2, and 3. This is where any of the options, that anti-foam options, etc., pH, that kind of thing that you would want to connect, this is where they would connect to. This does have an anti-foam baffle up here, which can be put on and off with water. And the connection would be up here, but again, this does not have that on this unit. On the screen, this is the main screen that comes up after it goes through its power on self-test. This is called the gauge screen. There's 2 sections to it. As you can see here, it says gauge. If I hit gauge again, it goes to the second screen and gives you your readouts. I'm going to go back to the first screen and go through them real quickly. This is your temperature. To change the temperature, you could go in, Change it, I have it set for 36, change it to PID, hit on, and it'll start ramping up the temperature. I've had it all the way up and it's calibrated and works fine. I will show you where the temperature thermocouple is on this in a minute. Here's your agitator for the stirrer that you saw inside there. You can see I have this on and it's set for 100, and then it's at the same time you can see it's continually fluctuating, trying to maintain that 100 RPMs. This does not have pH dissolved oxygen or oxygen or a spare. I've left these configurations. It is possible to take them out of the configuration, but if you go into the configurations of these different aspects, they can get quite involved with setting up cascades, etc. So I wanted to leave these here in case in the future you wanted to use these options, and it might make it easier for you to connect them at that time, rather than have to try to do them all, start over from scratch. If I go to configuration, it brings up this page, shows you what's installed, the loops that have been configured, which is all what you saw on the gauge screen. It shows you what server it's considered. That's for if there's a computer inside here. You can hit, you're in local mode, node number 1. You can hit system info. Gives you the firmware identification and CPU serial number and the version number of the controller interface. If we go to control type, it shows you it's a Bio Flo 4500. And just so you can see the configuration, I'd have to select the loop. Let's do the agitation loop. And this is why I left those other modules there. When you start taking out the other modules, these things disappear. Getting them back in with the values that should be there is not the easiest thing in the world. It's not self-evident. So I've left these things here just so you can see them if you need to use them in the future for certain things. For instance, the agitator does have the dissolved oxygen cascaded into it, but I have that turned off so it doesn't affect the agitation. Another one I want to point out is the pumps. I'm going to configure. I have these set to manual so that when I show you the operation of the peristaltic pumps, I can make them turn on and off. There may be different configurations. A lot of times these pumps are in conjunction with anti-foam devices, etc. Okay, I'm going to use pump 4 because there is no pump 4 on the system. Pump 4 is usually external, but I wanted to show you how the configuration is done. So I would pick pump 4, say configuration. Again, it brings up this type of screen. I say, I pick a device, so I'm going to pick the input device. Right now it's set to none. So I'm going to change that to a 0 to 1 volt transducer. I'm going to pick a slot, say OK. And it looks like it did it fine, it's there, but you have to actually OK it, so I'm going to hit OK. And it asks you, do you want to change the configuration of pump 4? And I want to say yes, so I hit yes. And it asks you for a system password. The system password for these systems is N as in Nancy, B as in boy, S as in Sam, all capitals. This does come up and show you caps lock is on by default, so I can just hit N, B, S, and say OK, and it's accepted the configuration. So whenever you see a system password, that's it. I'm going to take that back out. If you look before I do that, you can just see everything I put in there is now here. But we're not using that, so I'm going to take that out, put it back to none, say OK, change it again, N, B, S, OK. At this point I can say close. And we're back to our main gauge screen. If you should lose your configuration, there is a way to pull up an auxiliary configuration or a basic configuration that came with the unit. You come back to this page, you say load. It It asks you for the system password, NBS, and it says all loops in the configuration will be replaced. I'm not going to continue because that will change everything that I've done so far. But it will give you a starting point again if you need to change the configuration, or if you've entered something and you can't seem to get it to work again. So I'm going to say no. We're back to this screen. If you needed to calibrate one of your loops, you hit the calibration button up here. You can go in, and depending on the loop, you can give it a raw count, 0 standard, set 0, that kind of thing. Every loop is going to have its own set of parameters that is specific to its parameters. Cascade. This is where you set up what things interact with other things in the system. For instance, you could set your temperature to, when it gets to a certain temperature, you can turn your agitator up higher or whatever. It's a very involved process. It is explained in the manual, but it is something that can be changed from this point here. This is your sterilization loop. You go in, select temp. Here you would this is for your steam connections. You would have your sterilization temp, your heater temp, your drain time, heat time, sterilization time, and cool time. These are all parameters that are user configurable. You just go in, hit the button, change it to what you wanted, and say OK. So are you sure you want to change it? Yes. And to you again, do you want to change? Anytime you change something like that, you have to change the password. If I go back into there, and you can see the change that I've made is here. A handy thing to see is the valve sequencing. If you're in the sterilization program, it shows you all the slots and the valves that are involved.
It's still running.
What's going on? Heating A, heating B, sterilizing, cooling A, cooling B.
No, I did the heater.
And it shows you off, on, controlled,
and then,
which would be pulsed, basically.
Took a break, ready for back.
Okay, and lastly over here is your alarms. And here you can go into a particular thing like temperature, have it low and a high, have it enabled, have it audible. You want it to shut down the instrument, etc. You want it absolute or just a deviation. So again, you can do that. Most of these are all been disabled. But you can go into any one of these loops and do the same thing. Lastly, there is a trending button. This is something that once you have a program set up, fermentation process or whatever you're doing, you can see trendings of the different loops and cascades that are going on. And that's the basic operation of the computer portion of this. The last thing I want to show you down here is the peristaltic pumps. There are 3 of them. I've gone to that page of the gauges, and as you can see, they're all moving. This one I actually have. The peristaltic pump for this system is not a speed control. It is a tubing control device and in conjunction with time. So as you can see there, we're getting flow rate through this tube, and I'm just feeding through the pump and back in just to show you how it works. It's quick change. Just lift up on the lever and pull the tube out. Different size tubings, and the time you set for the pump in your operation is going to determine how much flow you get. Okay. Here you have your power switch and your light switch. Your light switch on top of the chamber, and in this case, this actually does control the light. There is no momentary switch on top of the light, so turning this off or on is going to turn your light off or on. On this one, your drain port is configured on this side, not on the other. Again, these are ports for external equipment that is not coming with this system. On this one, this is where your dissolved oxygen was a separate port. On the other instrument, on this one, it was not designed that way. What I did do, however, is I added another solenoid on this machine so that if you did decide to go with a separate dissolved oxygen input, the solenoid would be available to you. Up here, your filter elements again, they're clean and functional, and you shouldn't have to have any difficulties with them. I did want to point out on this one, which I didn't show on the other one, this is where your thermocouple sensor for the temperature of the internal substance being heated. It does require that there's some mineral oil down on the bottom to give it a good conductive distance between the walls. That has been cleaned and replaced and is functional. And here you can see the chamber has water in it, and it is rotating with the agitator, and it is on all the time. There is no momentary switch up here as there was on the other one. It's just a design change from the lamp fixture. On our screen here, we are at the gauge screen. This screen appears as the first screen after you do a normal power on. Go to the gauges again, and it shows you all the different possible loops. Many of these are not actually on the system, so you cannot use them, but I wanted to leave them there so in the future, if you wanted to add them, you could with less difficulty than trying to add them from scratch. But in the meantime, some of these, like for instance the pH and the dissolved oxygen, are not functional. And they have been turned off in the configuration. Here's your temperature, your agitator inside here, your gas pressure. We'll go to the configuration. Shows you all the different loops that are here. Your server, your controller, this one is. It's in local mode, node number 3. The installed cards that are here. If we go to System Info, it gives you the interface version, firmware ID, and the CPU serial number for the computer that's behind here. If you want to configure something, I can go, for instance, pump 2, configure. You can set these different functions in here to different to the different options that you would have that would be proper for the particular process that you're doing. I'm going to change this one to manual. Say OK. OK. Yes, are you sure you want to change? I say yes. Again, the system password is NBS. NBS. OK. And that, if I go back into the configuration for that pump, it should have changed. Yeah, it did. Whoops. Sorry. Let's go back in there again. And you can see it's in manual now. Again, you can also load a previously saved configuration, which also this one in this system, the other system has two. Again, NBS, but this would completely clear out the memory and reinstall everything, so that's quite time consuming. Takes about 20 minutes. I'm not going to do that, but it's easily done. Okay. Again, under calibration, you can pick your different things. I picked the wrong one. You can pick something that needs calibration. You can go in there. It tells you what it's set to, what you can set 0, you can set the span. Again, this is dependent upon the module that you're choosing. I go under cascade. Again, all your loops are here. You can go to a loop, for instance, a temperature loop, and you can cascade to some other components in here so that some things turn on and turn off at certain conditions that you've previously set. So for instance, if I wanted to cascade to a pump, I could just hit pump 3, and I can enable it or disable it, the minimum setting, the maximum setting, if it's an output percentage, you put it in there, etc. I'm going to change that back to none. Say OK. Yes. Here's our sterilization program again. You can change your parameters in here to give you a sterilization process, and the valve sequencing appears here. Shows you that you have either an on, off, or controlled state, which is represented by the graphs in here. And then if you wanted to sterilize, you would just say you want to initiate an automatic sterilization cycle, and at which time you would need steam connected, and it would proceed to do that. You'd have to turn on your steam valves to make sure that those particular components that you wanted sterilized were contacted by the steam. We're not going to do that. Here's your alarms. Again, you could pick a loop, give it an alarm, enable it or disable it, make it inaudible, and if you wanted it to shut down that particular zone or the instrument. Okay, and at the bottom here you have your peristaltic pumps. As you can see, I've got these pumps running just to show that they do in fact run. And pump 2 is off right at the moment. Usually you just have your tubing. I've got an air bubble in the tubing. Put your tubing in, clamp down. These pumps are the delivery volume is controlled by the size of the tubing and how long the pump runs for, which is programmable in your software. It is not speed driven. These do not change speed. So right now I have pump 2 off. I put the tubing in place and go up to pump 2, put it on manual. I already had it set for 100. That's 100%. I'm going to say OK. And as you can see, it changed to 100 here. And if we watch the air bubble here, you can see it moving through the tube. And of course, if you wanted to at any time, you can just disconnect this from here and it won't go anywhere. No, it is because I'm holding the tube up. And then just put the tubing back in, and it will continue to deliver. Standard pump operation here. Also included with these units is the quick connect, which can go on the ports on the side, and each one will also has a copy of the hard drive and the program needed to restore it in case in the future you ever had that problem. So that would be with each unit. All units. That's it. These units, they will be drained, and air will be blown through all the lines so that there will be no freezing of the water in shipment.